Is wheat bad for diabetics? Is the protein in gluten the cause for one becoming a type 1 diabetic, just like what happened to me? Has the modern wheat changed versus what was available in biblical times? Why is wheat now being referred to as both an anti-nutrient and an appetite stimulant all at the same time? Lastly, and this will both sadden and anger you, what poison, which very few people are aware of, is being directly sprayed on the wheat right before harvest? But before we begin, let me welcome all of you resilient diabetics out there. This is the channel we turn ordinary, struggling diabetics into extraordinary, well-controlled diabetics. If you don't know who I am and you are brand new to this channel, my name is Jay Sampat, and I became an insulin-dependent diabetic a little over 6 years ago due to an autoimmune attack which caused the destruction of my pancreas. So not only am I a diabetic just like you, where we will be walking that walk and talking that talk together, but I do also have a University of Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition dietetics, and that does come in very handy in discussing all these intricacies of being a diabetic. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, followed by the gray notification bell. Then choose turn on all notifications if you want to be notified when the next Resilient Diabetic video has been published. As with all of my videos, this should not be considered personal medical advice. This is my interpretation of the latest research. If you want medical advice, please always consult your physician. Many of you asked if I could elaborate a little more as to how and why I became an insulin-dependent diabetic at a much later age in life. In the video, Can Diabetics Eat Bread?, which I will put in the description box below, I mentioned that I had cut out breads and was on a limited carbohydrate diet from very early in my life, but was brainwashed by my nutritional program to meet the upper requirements of dietary fiber. So I blindly turned to using small amounts of a very popular, extremely high fiber breakfast cereal as a small snack once a day, which, by the way, has been curiously discontinued. What was the connection for me personally, and how does wheat affect your bodies as a type 1 or a type 2 diabetic? What you will find out today will have you sitting back in your chair feeling both disgusted and outraged. Our guidelines call for the average healthy American to consume 6 1-ounce servings of grains daily, half of which should come from whole grains and the other half from enriched grains. Our governing agencies that make these guidelines have not taken into account a few things. For one, the vast majority of human existence has evolved without wheat and gluten. Second, the wheat crop itself has been modified significantly, making the time we've had together even substantially less. There have been 3 strains of wheat throughout mankind, the last strain being in our food system for approximately 400 years. The world's wheat crop was radically transformed by Norman Borlaug in the 1950s and 60s in a movement called the Green Revolution. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, credited with saving billions of lives. At the time, one must remember grains were needed to feed the world's growing and starving population. He created a new species of semi-dwarf wheat. This is a little stocky, high-yield plant, genetically and biochemically light years removed from the wheat of just 40 years ago. Together with fertilizers and pesticides, increased yields to a whole nother level. This amazing new farming technology was leveraged and used around the world to basically try and end hunger. So the question we must ask ourselves today, did we feed and poison the world all at the same time with this untested wheat? And while we were tweaking the plant's genetics, we were also figuring out how to increase the glutens for better baking properties. So the end result was a plant that can produce easily digestible carbohydrates, but not the protein components, which are our main concern. So with fruits, which we talked about in the episode, Can Diabetics Eat Fruit?, which I will also put in the description box below, we genetically engineered them to be bigger and sweeter with more sugars. But in wheat, it is the proteins, not the carbohydrates, that are causing the problems. These new, short, stocky wheat hybrids have had major changes to their protein structure. So let's talk about proteins first, so you can start to easily put all of this together. Proteins are made of building blocks called amino acids. The human body uses these separate 21 amino acids to make the solid proteins it needs to function and grow. Because amino acids can be arranged in many different combinations, it's possible for your body to make thousands of different kinds of proteins from just the same 21 amino acids. Think of them as different shapes and sizes of Lego blocks. In order for the body to absorb these nutritious amino acids from the solid foods we eat, they are broken down into small pieces first by the stomach, and then broken down into even smaller pieces by the small intestine until each amino acids are released in the gastrointestinal tract and then absorbed into the blood as either singular amino acids or what's known as tripeptides or dipeptides. The body then takes these individual building blocks that are floating around in the blood and basically reassembles or recreates what it needs inside the cells for body growth and maintenance requirements. However, gluten, the protein in wheat, is the exception. It is broken down into pieces, but the body does not produce the necessary enzymes to dismantle gluten into the small individual amino acids required for the body to absorb them. Besides breads, it's found predominantly in pasta, in pizza, in bakery items. It can also be found in other sneaky places like salad dressings, sauces, roux, and in some cases of cross-contamination. So not only does this new hybrid have a much higher gluten content than ever before, but we also at one time in our history used to ferment breads very slowly, which breaks down the gluten even further, resulting in smaller amino acid chains that the body can tolerate better. So what is so bad about wheat proteins? Because these proteins in wheats cannot be broken apart, they are looked at like foreign invaders by our bodies. Inflammation is the natural response of our immune system to injury. You can see that in action whenever you get a cut or a splinter. The surrounding areas get red, hot, and tender. These longer chain proteins in wheat are gut irritants. They're like that paper cut or that splinter digging into the lining of your gut, causing an inflammatory response. What I'm about to say next is very important to understand. Inflammation in the gut contributes to a problem called intestinal permeability. The gut has very complex systems of border controls and guards which lets the digested broken down food, the glucose, the amino acids, the fats, along with the corresponding nutrients like the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants to enter into your bloodstream. But here's where things get extremely complicated. It has to keep everything else out. Every day, you swallow millions of random viruses, bacteria, undigestible molecules like dust and chemicals and other stuff that needs to go out the other end and not into your bloodstream. Inflammation in the gut lining destroys that beautiful complex system of border control or defense. It pries apart or loosens the junctions between the cells in the gut so that toxic materials the body does not want ends up diffusing through. Hence the name has been given leaky gut. As a result, the undigestible food particles and all the toxic materials we do eat passes into the bloodstream through the walls of the small intestine. Once it enters the blood, all hell breaks loose as the immune system goes into overdrive. Unbeknownst to you, World War X has just started inside the body, and unfortunately, there will be collateral damage. This results in a volatile, pro-inflammatory release of cytokines, histamine, leukotrienes, and prostaglandins. So the food that we end up eating and the toxins that we are exposed to on a daily basis are two of the biggest contributors to the likelihood of one developing an autoimmune disease. Research over the last 20 years has been focusing on the role of the gut, the inflammatory response, thus the explosion of autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, type 1 diabetes, psoriasis, Graves' disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, just to name a few. What we know now is the intestinal mucosa of the gut comprises the largest surface area in the body, and the gut-associated lymphoid tissues represents the most extensive immune organ we have. In other words, it is what really protects us from the outside world. What do the studies show? Approximately half of the patients with type 1 diabetes had an aggressive T cell and cytokine response to wheat proteins. Children with celiac disease are tenfold more likely to develop type 1 diabetes. What about the experimental rat models? One study showed that 64% of mice fed wheat-containing chow turned into insulin-dependent type 1 diabetics, compared to 15% of mice that were fed non-wheat containing chow. And what is the worst part of this all? Once the autoimmune process is triggered and develops, you are susceptible to developing a second and possibly a third disease. Why? Because of that collateral damage. And this was my case. The first response to gluten proteins was a severe case of dermatitis herpetiformis, which is this very itchy red rash with raised blisters. I got these painful blisters all over my arms and legs, and I had no idea at the time that the high fiber cereal was the cause. So I kept on eating them. Then things turned for the worse. This was followed up with severe gastrointestinal pain, the likes of which I have never experienced, and extreme vomiting. That was when I put two and two together, but it was far too late. Several years after, the initial autoimmune response irreversibly damaged my pancreas, and if you've been following me, then you know my thyroid gland too. So I am both insulin and thyroid dependent. Do these unbroken down proteins have an effect on the brain? And that's where some of the new research and studies are looking at. These peptides can bind to the opiate receptors of the brain. Yes, opiate receptors. Unlike morphine or oxycodone, these wheat peptides do not make us high, nor do they provide pain relief. Instead, they may only stimulate appetite and cause us to eat more. But you didn't need any study to tell you this. You can have a meal full of breads and pasta and be stuffed, yet still feel hungry and want to eat more carbohydrates. This is devastating to a diabetic, not only in terms of glucose control, but being able to stick or adhere to any kind of lifestyle or diet change. Today, the average person in the US eats around 132 pounds of wheat per year, often in the forms of bread, cereals, crackers, pasta, cookies, and cakes, which translates to about 0.8 ounces of gluten each day. There is a large conspiracy theory out there that thinks the smart food scientists stumbled upon this potential appetite stimulating effect of wheat proteins decades ago that I have to mention. How else can we explain why wheat can be found in so many processed foods, from tomato soup to licorice, soy sauce, ice cream, puddings, and even imitation bacon? There's a third complication. Gluten-based foods have also been labeled anti-nutrients, whereas nutrients are substances that nourish plants and animals to grow and live. Anti-nutrients earn their title because they can block the absorption of nutrients. In plants, these are compounds designed to protect the species from bacterial infections and insects. Phytic acid is the major storage form of phosphorus in cereals and is known as a food inhibitor. What this means is that phytic acid in the wheat can combine with calcium, magnesium, copper, iron, and especially zinc and then it forms this complex in the intestinal tract which blocks their absorption. When I did my video on breads, a subscriber immediately sent me a message to look into something very bizarre. That is, if I decided to do a follow-up on any wheat-based foods. And what I will share with you next blew me away. You may or may not live in a city where certain attorney groups are running constant commercials on TV and radio looking for cancer patients who were exposed to a substance called Roundup herbicide. I see them on TV all the time. Glyphosate is the main ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup herbicide and is recognized as the world's most largely used weed killer. Farmers in cold, wet regions often have trouble getting wheat and barley to dry evenly so they can start harvesting. So many years ago, they came up with this idea to actually kill the crop in advance with Roundup several days to weeks before harvest to accelerate the drying down process of the grains. This drastically increases the farmer's yield per acre and their bottom line. Plus, they're able to harvest crops as much as 2 weeks earlier than they normally would, a huge advantage for those northern, colder climates. The question is, how much residue makes it onto the final product with applications so close to harvest time? I don't think anybody truly knows. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 99% of durum wheat, 97% of spring wheat, and 61% of winter wheat here in the United States has been doused with Roundup as part of the harvesting process. At what times during the process and how much is completely unknown. Can you imagine the public's response if they actually knew that Roundup is being sprayed on the oats in their Cheerios only a few weeks before it's manufactured? That is why there is this don't ask, don't tell policy in the industry. So let me try and tie this all together for the big picture. I mentioned the word collateral damage, which is injury inflicted on something other than its intended target, like in times of war. The same thing happens to our human bodies when we are under attack. If one has leaky gut, then we know we have been breached on one front. In an attempt to stop the invasion through the inflammatory process, the body sacrifices its own cells, like the pancreas, in an attempt to protect the body as a whole. If you add in hyperinsulinemia from all the excessive glucose from the flour, the body is now fighting a secondary front of inflammation. You add in a virus or the flu or the coronavirus, and now we're talking 3 battles all at the same time. This is why those who are healthy with the right diets that do not cause inflammation along with a low and controlled blood sugars can fight viruses. The body can focus all of its efforts on one front. And let me make this very important point. Diabetes is one of the most prevalent diagnoses seen in hospital patients, accounting for approximately 38% of all patients admitted to hospitals. Say you're in the hospital and fighting for your life as a result of the new COVID-19 virus or some other ailment. What are the experts, the caregivers in that hospital going to feed you? And mind you, this is a real hospital sample breakfast specifically for diabetics. And what's on the menu? 1/2 a cup of V8 juice, all sugars. 3/4 a cup of bran flakes, more sugars, more gluten, more inflammation. A sugar substitute. 1 cup of fat-free milk, more sugars, more inflammation. 1 slice of whole wheat toast, more glutens, more sugars, and a cup of coffee. That does not include 2 more high carb snacks, a lunch, a dinner, which are also extremely high in carbs and wheat-based products. Knowing what you know now, will those amounts of sugar and wheat-based products help or hurt the most vulnerable of patients right when they need it the most? Non-diabetics are usually shocked when I tell them whole wheat bread increases blood sugars to a higher level than table sugar or even white bread. It's only until you've become diabetic yourself and you check your blood sugars do you get to see this for yourself. But we've been told it's healthy because of the extra fiber. I will set up a playlist for you with more videos directly related to our diets. In the video, how much fiber do diabetics need? Is 10 grams good enough? How about 30? What about 50 grams a day? What about the fiber in fruit? Is it healthy? You will not only know the flawed science behind the recommendations, but who's behind it. What are the deadliest foods for diabetics and heart health? Have we been conned by the single biggest nutritional scandal of our lifetime? This episode will undoubtedly shock and awe you too. If you're on your desktop or laptop, I want you to use the mouse to click this upcoming box. If you're on your mobile device, I want you to tap that with your fingers. The first is the link to subscribe to this all-important channel. The second is the link to the playlist mentioned on diet and foods. So, have a great and productive day, and we'll see you with another new episode, which are generally released weekly. Bye for now.